Well, good afternoon. If you are in New York City or Montreal or somewhere in Atlantic Canada, good evening. If you're in the United Kingdom or Portugal or somewhere in Europe or Africa, greetings to people all around the world in this holiday period when we want peace. We want peace for everyone, everywhere. No matter what the conflict is, we need to find ways to peace, is my belief. And one of the ways that we do that is through music. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays, the last edition of the year. This is Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know by now, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all over the world. Those of you who have watched this program since April 24th of 2020 know that I put a great deal of stock in having my last person of the year, first person of next year show be someone I'm crazy about. And I've had Frederica von Stade and I've had Martina Arroyo. And I have to just put this out there that one of my very, 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 very favorite artists is Gerald Finley, who I call Jerry. And so therefore, if I sound in no way impartial, that's because I'm not impartial as regards Gerald Finley as an artist, as a man. And so I'm really honored, Jerry, that you have joined us as we leave one year and enter another. How are you?
Oh, it's so delightful to be here, Fred. I've so look forward to to rounding off this particular year with someone like you. It's great, and I it's always great talking to anybody who's passionate about the
Oh
art.
God, yes. um, I'm going to put this right out there since it's no secret that 2023 was in many ways a very challenging year. There were beautiful things in the year, of course, but um, for many people all over the world, whether it's war, whether it's climate, whether it is personal life, whether it's failed dreams, whatever we want to talk about, and I will have a drink in a moment to clear my throat. Um, you as an artist have to leave the world, and maybe you think I'm wrong, at the edge of the stage when you enter the stage and do what the music and what the role, if you're singing opera, asks you to do? Or do you bring the world with you as you set foot on the stage?
Yeah, one of the songs that I've been singing in recitals this year is Der Atlas by Schubert, and it's a wonderful poem by Heine, and it says, Ich unglückselger Atlas, äh, die ganze Welt muss ich tragen, die ganze Welt von Schmerzen muss ich tragen. And it's Atlas really saying, you proud heart, you thought you were going to, carry the happiness of the world. And now what's happened is you've made me miserable by carrying the pain of the world. It's um it's one of Schubert's most incredibly well, it's not just frank, it's really completely uh desperate and uh and the really the pride of humanity when humanity thinks that it's got things right or it's trying to do things. Humanity is a good way to circumvent its own self. Heine really got that well, and Schubert put that together with an amazing dramatic. It's full voiced. There's the intensity is huge. The pianist is pounding away on it, and we can bring, if you like, the idea of pain onto the stage. Um, in fact, a lot of the most incredible dramas that I've been part of, reflects pain of characters and how they deal with it. And I think really that's what our job is as an artist, is to enact, to inhabit a world that that the audience can relate to and hopefully find solutions to understanding the pain, understanding the trial, understanding the challenges that confront characters, poets, ordinary human beings. And so the question was, do I leave the world, the current world, at the edge of the stage? And I suppose that the answer to that is yes. It's sometimes very hard to be disciplined enough to shut out the world. But I know colleagues that have performed with, personal tragedies just happening in their own lives, and yet they somehow manage to leave that at the door, give incredible performances of joy, of redemption, of healing, and then be a complete wreck after the show and go out the stage door. So yeah, I mean, but then many people have to do this anyway. I mean, we're all required in some way to leave our burdens aside and get on with some life. But of course, music is a channel towards healing and grace and hopefully redemption in some way, and to know that we do have love in our hearts really all the time. So yeah, I'm always hopeful. I have to say, I'm cheerfully optimistic generally. But playing hard characters, playing evil characters, playing characters that define the challenges that some people face. Yeah, it's never easy. Some people say playing Scarpia is one of the most satisfying parts of their career. To a certain extent, it's great to leave those characters on the stage, of course. So yeah, I'm leaving both worlds in their places.
Well, you raised a point that is I hadn't even thought of, but you raised it very well. Um, Part of the reason that I'm a big fan of Gerald Finley as an artist and admire him as a man is that he happens to be a bass baritone, and many of the characters that I most care about in opera happen to be bass baritones or sometimes high basses. It just so happens that what they're grappling with is stuff that I find very chewable and very engaging. And, so you could be Don Giovanni, for example, and all that he brings, or the Count in Le Nozze di Figaro and all of the confusion that he brings. But you can be Nick Shadow in The Rake's Progress, which was just, I'm getting goosebumps as I think about that role, or The Flying Dutchman, or one of my very favorite roles in general, and one of my favorite roles of yours, Wolfram and Tannhäuser, Golo and Peleus and Melisande.
Amfortas is another.
And I was about to get, that's the big one, The Wound
Yeah.
That Does Not Heal.
Yeah.
And I took a long time relatively to get to the opera Parsifal. When I say get to it, I heard it early. I just didn't feel it or understand it. My very first production of that I saw was in April of 1976. I was 19, and I saw it in Berlin, and it was one of those productions where there was a green light bulb on the stage, and that was the whole set. And whoever was Kundry or Amfortas would stand under the light bulb, sing, and then go out. And I had no clue what was going on. I didn't know the opera. So that delayed my arrival. But now, with seniority and with many productions of Parsifal under my belt as a worker or as an audience member, I really get it. And Amfortas and Gurnemanz happen to be characters that are very powerful to me, even more than Kundry and Parsifal, who to me seem more like devices for Amfortas and Gurnemanz. Talk about Amfortas and about the weight of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty naive when I first took him on too, and it was I don't know, I felt like I was going down into this. I mean, I couldn't believe how much pain there was in the not necessarily the music of it, but the inhabiting of the character. He's only got 29 minutes of music. Someone said, you know actually how long you sing? It's 29 minutes of music, but my goodness, in that 29 music, his first utterance is in pain, quiet, almost unable to speak. At that moment where exhaustion, lack of horizon, shall we say, or knowing that this, ein wenig Rast, a little bit of rest. But he's been carried. The idea is that he's being carried by soldiers or by henchmen to this place. He said, "No, I must rest from not even walking or not even journeying in that way." And then someone said, "Well, maybe he's concerned." And this is the thing that got me. He's concerned for those that are carrying him. Mm-hmm. And in that, and it switched my whole view of his realization of him being a burden on the community of the knights, rather than his own pain. And I think that's all of a sudden we've got two layers here of someone who's compassionate, someone who's repentant, someone who's trying to find a solution to be redemption for the sins that he's committed, and not finding that, and literally the physical wound that will not heal, but also his guilt about the act, and then the burden, shall we say, of being a burden to others that are trying to survive in a community that is disintegrating because of his acts. And so it's incredible. So 29 minutes of music, okay. In that it tears one's singing soul from the depth, really, to cry out, to rail against his fate, to plead for understanding, to associate himself with the potential of redemption. He's not even sure whether it's going to be attainable or not. So there we are. I mean, wow. And that can make you think as an actor, as a human, and then having to channel that all into singing.
And keep your voice working and all of that working.
Yeah.
When the emotion can creep in.
Yeah. And of course, we know that the best singing that we ever experience as an audience member is the most honest.
Yeah.
That amazing thing when this year has also been a celebration of Maria Callas, of course. And if there was any artist in the history of our profession that touched people by the sheer sound of her voice, I mean, of course, there have been many others, but of course, this being a fantastic reminiscent year for her. And so a lot of her music we've heard this year in kind of retrospect and everything. And I'm still astounded at how unique a voice it was, but how unfettered it was, and how you could just, I don't know what it was. I mean, again, this is the mystery of singing that touches all. I'm an audience member too sometimes, and that's the thing that grabs me if I've ever heard it.
I did a 5-part series this year in November and December about Maria Callas here on Adagio. Wonderful. And I could have gone a lot more, but I wanted you for the end of the year.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt that.
No. I can get back to her next year if I need to, because I've found so much in my research about her that even though I've studied her and taught her for a long time, there's so much more to learn. And I've been listening to old recordings, and we covered first her childhood in the first segment. The second one was her life as a teenager in Greece and how Greece formed her, and
Yeah.
tragedy formed her. And I want to get to that in a bit with you.
Yeah.
And then the next part were her golden years in Milan at La Scala, then
Mm.
her years in France, but also her recordings. And the last segment was about Callas's legacy today, how we experience her today, which is in part what you were just talking about.
Mm.
Um, and yes, I think I would invite listeners and you, Jerry, to go and listen to these programs when you have time.
Oh,
Um, but back to Parsifal, the opera. Gurnemanz is a character who has grown on me immensely. He's someone I just frankly didn't notice because Parsifal's the name of the opera, and Kundry is the one woman of note. There are those funny flower maidens. There is Amfortas, who, as you get older, you experience him more. But Gurnemanz is, he's to me, the interlocutor between the audience and the story
oh,
in a lot of
absolutely.
ways.
Oh,
And that's the long role of the opera.
I mean, that's the titan of the opera. I mean, even Parsifal doesn't have quite a lot of music
No.
either. But no, I like you. I mean, oh, first of all, it's a huge role. He has to explain the entire situation, both to the members on stage about what's going on, and then obviously to, as you say, to the audience in form of storytelling in that way. Um, in a way, actually, it's a clever craftsmanship of Wagner because although he's got a lot to say, he's not he's not an orator who's doing it dramatically. He's doing it absolutely with this kind of again an honesty of this is the situation. How are we going to get through it? These are these are the elements that we could look at. Um, um, the not that he doesn't apportion blame necessarily to Fortas, but he clearly realizes that the situation that they're in certainly a result of what Amfortas has done, and I think this is really to learn such a long role. I mean, I'm full of admiration for my colleagues who undertake it um, and sing it beautifully because there's some beautifully poetic moments as well where Wagner has allowed him not just to be, a Wagnerian bass baritone sort of launching forth and everything, but some very, very tender inward moments. I mean, particularly near towards the end, um, where he's trying to fathom the entire situation, and and he's full of hope. That's the one thing about Gurnemanz. He is full of hope, and to have a low voice, have
Mm-hmm.
that capacity is really wow. It does counterweight somehow the despair, I think, and yeah, and the real commitment that he has to his faith and everything. It's fantastic. It's yeah, oof, gives me chills thinking about it.
So there's another character who may not seem in any way related to the opera Parsifal, but nonetheless, I love him. Um, I think you've heard me say at different times when asked what my favorite opera is, I name 5 or 6 or 7, and then I say, and every note written by Rossini. And well before people were doing Guillaume Tell, Guglielmo Tell, William Tell, with any kind of frequency, I would basically go to every music director and artistic director I knew, and I'd say, you have to do that. And I was able to persuade one wonderful conductor to do a great production, which toured and got a lot of attention and so on. And I was very happy when the Met finally brought it to New York. I went to every one of them, including a notorious one that you and I can talk about.
Yeah,
Um, and William Tell, he doesn't have Arnold's high notes. He doesn't have some of the beautiful arias for the women, but he's the rock. He's the Hans Sachs. He's the moral center. He's the one who takes risks and does it for the right reason. And given your combination of characteristics as an artist, as a man, as a voice, um, you so completely embodied that for me that it was a bit like watching a more Italianate Swiss Hans Sachs. And tell me, because you and I have never spoken about this role, tell me your feelings about William Tell.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, everybody knows the story of William Tell. I think, and you sort of think, well, how can such a straightforward thing? Everybody remembers the arrow through the apple on top of his son's head, um, and how do you flesh out the story of that? Well, the Swiss certainly have that in their complete heritage. So
Mm-hmm.
the fact that Rossini kind of knew, if you like, the whole idea of community. Again, I mean, that's why in some ways the idea of Meistersinger and William Tell aren't that far apart, really,
Mm-hmm.
because it is uh, the the idea of a community being okay. Yes, the influence is what's trying to upset them, trying to destabilize the community. I mean, one's under oppression. Um, the Swiss are under oppression and need to liberate themselves. In Meistersinger, of course, it's the whole idea of art
Mm-hmm.
being being invaded, I suppose, by outside influences and modern thought, which I suppose that can be assault on a community as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but William Tell, he's a he has a family. He's a man of the community. He has very trusted friends, um, and but he's not a leader at the beginning, and that's the kind of the wonderful element of the story, I think, which is fun for me as the character, is you start as just part of the community. Yes, he's a renowned uh, archer and and a hunter, um, but he's not necessarily a leader until he's forced to because of what's happening to his family, and he understands that there is shall we say, other uh, royal figures involved that could be more responsible to the community than he is. In any case, he senses duty and he senses his strengths uh, as a fighter, as whatever. But then he realizes he's just a man trying to protect his family,
Mm-hmm.
and out of that comes a hero. And of course, that's I think the potential of every family and of uh, every human in society, that they may at one point be called upon to use their strengths, their education, their mind, their sensibility, their intelligence to rise above and and do extraordinary things, not just for themselves but for other people. And so, yeah, William Tell is an underrepresented, I'd say, as you say, in the performance schedule of many things. It's a big opera to put on
It is,
for
but
four different men's choruses, I think,
yeah.
in various things. Once remember saying to someone I wanted to sing the very short aria that he sings before the apple moment, um, and the conductor who I was talking to said, "I can't possibly do it. There are four horns. No, there might be even six horns. Anyhow, a lot of horns in that, and it was uneconomic to do even that little excerpt. So I think in that way, it's a big undertaking. Of course, the redemption, the C major uh, sort of glow at the very end of the opera, apparently was used to sign off uh, the television channel Rai in
Yes.
Italy for years and years. And so,
Yes.
and that in that way, the entire culture of Italy is infused with Rossini's music. That incredible morning, that incredible idea of sunrise, of a new dawn,
Hmm.
which is features at the end of the opera, is life enhancing. And you know, the television channels obviously knew that as they signed off every day.
I like when I teach to take three operas by Rossini: L'Italiana in Algeri,
Yeah,
Semiramide, and William Tell, and basically say that those three works pointed to everything that Wagner and Verdi and certain other composers would do after that. In some way, the DNA of what they created can be found in those three operas.
my goodness. Yeah, yeah. I can see that. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think Rossini is so maligned in some ways that he had such huge output at the beginning. He had, that William Tell was really, well, not squeezed out of him necessarily, but the fact that it was such a distance from his, you probably know what the opera preceding it was and how many years it was.
Semiramide.
Semiramide, okay,
Viaggio Rems and Semiramide were
the
right
last,
around there. Yeah.
yeah, and so well, anyway, whether he was, mm, whether whether Falstaff in that regard, after so many years, Verdi finishing his career after a big break after Othello, um, uh, whether he was encouraged by the fact that, yes, he'll throw the kitchen sink at his final opera, like Rossini did in his final opera.
Mm-hmm.
I can see probably um, these incredibly mature, secure composers didn't have to write anything more, but wow, the bravura with which those operas were created is incredible.
Now, I don't recall the date, you might, but there was a day in New York where the Met was doing a Rossini doubleheader, and there was Guillermo Tell in the afternoon, and a scheduled performance of L'Italiana in Algeri at night.
Right.
And what happened?
Hmm. Well, there are two intermissions anyway in in William Tell, and we were sailing along, really enjoying it. I think I was maybe performance six of seven or eight, and it was a matinee, as you say, and
Broadcast, Fabio
broadcast.
Luisi conducting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there we were with waiting to go on for our final act, which isn't long, and everybody at that point is anticipating this glorious finale, uh, really. And well, anyway, it was announced on to the backstage that we would be holding the curtain for 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 technical reasons, it was said. And then it was held and held, and as far as we were aware, and then we got, of course, it's just in the beginning days of messages being able to transfer between front of stage and backstage, that the audience had been asked to leave the auditorium. And then there was reports that some sort of, yeah, forensics team or whatever, police were arriving. That anyway, people were ushered out, and we were asked to leave the building immediately, as quickly as possible. We weren't told why, and it was reported very soon afterwards, of course, that a member of the audience had, during this intermission, decided to cast a great uh, a bag or a box or something of dust into the orchestra pit, so that the orchestra floor was covered in this powder. And of course, being security conscious as theaters are these days, it was perceived as a threat and a dangerous one. So we were ushered out. And of course, in the end, it was discovered that someone had simply scattered some ashes of their dearly beloved, um, as a
Dearly beloved music teacher.
music teacher, in
Yeah.
honor of that teacher.
Yeah.
So, and had no idea that the furore that presented itself would be the result in any way, and they were mortified and apologetic, and unfortunately we lost the end of that opera, and I think
Yeah.
also the evening's performance was also cancelled.
Yeah. My experience of that day was that there were many people who were Rossini lovers. I lived near Lincoln Center, so I didn't have to travel much, but Rossini lovers came from everywhere for the double header of Guillaume Tell, Guglielmo Tell in the afternoon and L'Italiana in Algeria at night with Mariana Pizzolato, who's a wonderful interpreter of the role of Isabella.
Lovely.
And I'm a friend of Mariana, and it was to be a big deal for her to go on. And what happened was, yes, I was in the theater and I was in the dress circle and I saw the person dumping powder into the pit.
You
And
saw
it
it.
went
Oh,
on
okay.
house right, stage left,
Right.
so on the timpani and on the brass in that area over there.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I didn't know what it was, and it was horrifying. And I remember leaving and getting out and so forth. But the subtext there for me was that one of my very, very, very dearest friends in the world who lived in Italy was an Italian, and his wife and their children made a special trip to visit New York. And I got them tickets to Italiana because Tell was sold out. And they were to join me that evening for Italiana. And they came all this way at considerable expense. I bought the tickets, but they did the expense to come to New York.
Yeah.
He was one of my very, very dearest friends. And we didn't know, and he didn't know that he had cancer.
Oh,
And so soon after he took ill and he died. So he will never have gotten to see the Metropolitan Opera. He saw the building. He had visited me years before when I worked at the Met,
hmm.
but with his family for that special occasion for Italiana. And Mariana Pizzolato was to meet us after. So,
Oh, lovely
what
idea.
she
Yeah.
did, because the character of Isabella is a defiant, strong Italian woman who
Yeah.
does not take anything from anyone, she came out on the piazza, on the plaza of Lincoln Center,
Yeah.
and sang music from the opera a cappella on a,
Oh,
I remember it was a rather chilly night, and
wow.
sang for my friends. And then I, at the last minute, ran into what was then called Avery Fisher Hall and bought tickets to the Philharmonic. So they got to hear something.
Wow.
But it was sad for a lot of reasons, but because it was very deflating. I can remember other circumstances in which a performance would be brought to a halt when I was manager and had to manage that. And part of that, apart from the logistics, which are crazy, is the emotional deflation that happens
Yes, of
for the
course.
audience and for the artists.
Mm,
When there might be a death on the stage or might be a death in the audience,
mm,
um, or threats of some kind, fire alarms going off. You never know in our world.
no.
But we I view our theaters, our opera houses as sort of my cathedrals. And when I go in them, we expect a certain kind of safety and security and removal from what's going on outside, or
Yeah.
being transported a different way to what's going on inside. But I felt very bad for you and your cast because it was a fabulous performance. I came to all, so I was lucky to hear them.
Mm.
But it's a wonderful character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. It was a really difficult because a moment as artistically, really, as much as anything. I know that
Mhm.
the circumstances were unbelievably obscure and crazy, but as you say, to be prevented from completing the journey in some ways, it was a little like pressing the rewind button on the next performance when we got to that part, thinking, oh yeah, we are going to go forward now. Um, but yeah, no, it was a sad occasion for audience and cast alike. Yeah.
So I have a feeling, Jerry, that you have been asked a particular question many, 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 many times in 2023. relating to a role that you did in San Francisco and New York. You and I met in 2008. I remember because you were doing the premiere, New York premiere of John Adams's Dr. Atomic, and you played, let's call him the title role, J. Robert Oppenheimer. And I was asked by the Metropolitan Opera Guild to run a panel in which you and mezzo soprano Sasha Cook and bass baritone Eric Owens and mezzo or contralto Meredith Arwadi, I think she pronounces her last name, the cast of Dr. Atomic. And I had a long conversation in front of an audience about this. And what was notable, frankly, is that I became friends of all four of you after that date. It doesn't always happen that I run a panel and automatically we become friends. But Sasha and I are very close. We've done a lot of stuff together, and I'm a big, big admirer of Eric and of Meredith as well. But obviously there was a very famous film called Oppenheimer that came out in the summer of 2023, and people spoke about it, and I'm sure asked you about it endlessly. And so rather than ask you a question, I'm going to ask you this. What were the questions you were most asked?
Oh, had I seen the film? Did I see it?
Okay.
Did I see it? And the answer to that is no.
Uh-huh.
Not yet. It's it's been a busy year,
Yeah.
including a new John Adams opera, which has been exciting. But no, I think the real I mean the basic question really was, why was it called Trinity? The nuclear test. And in fact, because the opera just dealt with the thin wedge of the days up to the first test of the bomb in the Alamogordo Desert in New Mexico. What happened after that in terms of the opera goes up to the moment of the first use of the bomb in war, and beyond that, Oppenheimer's life was incredible and extraordinary. And during the course of my preparation for J. Robert Oppenheimer, I didn't want to inform myself kind of with hindsight. So I didn't want to see what he thought about it then, afterwards, and in his role as the head of the Atomic Energy Committee that happened, or his political situation that happened afterwards, the breakdown of the relationship he had with fellow scientists, particularly Edward Teller, and really the tragedy that followed that. I was much more interested in the kind of in his forward-looking view of his wonder of the world of physics, of the wonder of the power of creation, shall we say. And I was also fascinated, as he was obviously, with the poetry of amazing masters. I had that incredible aria, Batter My Heart. And actually, the question I'm most asked is, will I do it again? Obviously, there's an Oppenheimer revival. Is it going to happen? I think John Adams would like to know that answer too, in some ways. The truth is, there are some productions going on, but not as many as one might expect. It's a kind of a really, obviously people now are very much more aware of the subject. And it could be that just by having this film come out that we might see further productions of Dr. Atomic come out. But really the lovely conversations I've had with people about it is, he was such a complicated man. And and how did they do that in such a short period of time? And and can you imagine thinking that watching the first test, you might have annihilated the entire world? I mean, there were caveats to that, of course, but people, I think, have got really interested in that moment in history, particularly of that the development of the nuclear bomb. Why do we have it? How could we allow ourselves to have this huge destruction? It's the shadow of over us all now. Do I think it'll ever happen? That's the other question. Is now that it's out there, and it's just like, well, we have to trust that the unthinkable is so powerful a protection that it won't be used uh, because it will be unbelievably terrible if it does.
One of the many things that I liked about that opera, Dr. Atomic, which obviously in preparation for our panel, I had to study a lot more. Usually, when I study an opera in preparation for some reason, for teaching, for speaking, whatever, or just for going,
Yeah,
um, it's an older work and there are a lot more sources to go to
yeah,
and commentary. There really was not that much for that opera, and therefore I began with the score and libretto, as I would anyway. But I had to sort of form my own relationship to it because there were no guides from scholars from 100 years ago to help me into it, and therefore I was gratified to do this panel with all of you because it helped me learn, because you were involved in rehearsal.
mm-hmm.
But one of the things among many that I like about this opera, and let me try to phrase this clearly, is yes, it's biographical because it's based on the life and part of the story of a real figure who existed more or less at our time. Um, it's not like an historical biography of Julius Caesar, Queen Elizabeth I, pick your person from the past on whom so much has been heaped that we don't have a full idea of who they might have been. With Oppenheimer, he was more or less of our time, and there was audio and print journalism and so forth that, and sound of him himself. They gave us a sense of who he was, how he moved, how he looked in life rather than portraits. Um, but what I liked about it is that some operas that are biographical, especially of contemporary people, tend to feel like they have checklists that they have to go through and hit the high points that we all know, whether it was an assassination or a marriage or an extramarital affair, or whatever it was that we know about this person. And if we don't hit those points, then we're not covering his or her story. What John Adams did, and musically, and what the cast did and the production did, and was it Alan, the conductor, the
Alan
wonderful
Gilbert,
conductor,
yeah,
Alan Gilbert, conducted so wonderfully, um, is that I came to understand, or at least have ideas about who this man was rather than what he did.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that was part of the magic of that opera for me, is that through the music, through the performances, and so on, I felt I knew him better at the end of the opera than I did at the beginning,
Hmm.
even having read up about him on the printed page.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So in your
Yeah,
study of the opera,
I appreciate that actually, because in some ways we're often asked uh how to develop a character or whatever. And I think in some ways, yes, you're informed by the libretto source and certainly by the music, um to give an emotional kind of context or whatever. But and I think in some ways, yes, absolutely, that it's exactly what we're trying to do. I mean, even Nixon in China, in some ways, those again, characters in history that seem to be well documented. Um, but it's always much more interesting to know, as you say, how they feel about things, or I don't know, even petulance and humor and
mm-hmm.
irony, but also the idea, going back to Robert Oppenheimer's, is the depth of his commitment to his workers, the idea that he was a leader but wanted to do everything by collaboration, but knew his intellect would spark him in certain ways. But also his search for truth through through different incredible languages, reading Sanskrit and the poetry of John Donne, and really just trying to find essences of humanity, of somehow touching truth in some way. And boy, was that ever a help for me, that those sources of, were available for libretto in that regard. And that Peter Sellers and John picked out those moments of highlight from an emotional point of view, what his emotional journeys were. And yeah, and I've been recently doing Bluebeard, for goodness sake, in a completely different take, where he's being portrayed, he is cast as a carer for someone suffering from dementia, in Judith. And honestly, when you hear Bartok's music, it's an incredible investment in emotion, and how music therefore is an incredible driver, shall we say, of relationship between human beings, because we can use music in a powerful way. I mean, I think of Stanley Kubrick in Clockwork Orange, or as a burden, really. I mean, it goes back to almost what we were talking about at the very beginning. But also this ability to enliven, connect, and rejoice, actually, in the knowledge, as you said, of who someone is as a character.
So since you mentioned that production of Bluebeard, which I saw only on streaming, unfortunately, I did not hear it live. I had the delight, I think is too light a word, the astonishing pleasure of conversing with Susan Bullock, who played Judith in some of the productions. This production has gone around, and there have been different Bluebeards and different Judiths, but I think you actually did perform with her once, yes?
Oh yes, yes. Yeah, we had chances in London, to do it.
I would say that my conversation with her, and I liked her as an artist. I didn't know her in any way as a person. That was one of those life-changing conversations for me, because she's so, and I can send it to you, so beautifully expressed what you just alluded to, but from her character's point of view, rather than your characters, plural, rather than your character. And so now I will ask people to watch you and her in tandem. Talk about that production, if you would, from your perspective, and Bluebeard as a caregiver with a person with dementia, with Alzheimer's, and how that worked. For me on the streaming, it worked beautifully.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled that you've seen that, Fred, because in some ways it was a labor of. It came out of in that crazy time when we were all just wondering how we were going to continue with our lives,
because of the pandemic.
Pandemic time. And having reached a certain part in my career where I sang in the Terlinsky production at the Met in 2019, and that opened my opportunities, shall we say, to sing it as a conventional piece of mid 20th century reflection on a late or mid 19th century story, French, fairy tale kind of, where Bluebeard is this very mysterious, dark figure who brings Judith back to his castle. Who knows, willingly or not? That was the thing. She's presented with damp, dark circumstance, and she asks him questions all the time. She keeps asking him questions, and he's kind of reticent. He's very staid, but there's a malevolence in the not just the music, but in his responses and his distance. And in the end, you realize that he has many wives who have either been killed or are being held captive. So that's the fundamental. Bartok is obviously exposing 7 doors in this. Behind each door that Judith asks to open, there's a color, shall we say, which represents elements of Bluebeard's past lives. So it just seemed an opportunity to flip this on its head with my wonderful co-creators, shall we say, or Stephen Higgins and Daisy Evans of something, a group called Silent Opera. They are innovators. They are wonderfully imaginative. They're looking for ways to bring opera in all its forms to a broader audience, and really invest in the idea of, if we were to look at an opera journey that enhanced the music somehow, could we somehow, gain power in sharing this? So apparently it came from a truffle lunch that they had in Italy. They were in Battignano, in central Italy, and doing a production in a wonderful castle. And then thinking, well, yeah, but what if this was just Judith's memories? What if, and then it became, well, what if Bluebeard was in her imagination, so that the malevolence is actually her creation? And then, wow, it kind of, the light bulb dawned on them, and they said, well, maybe we should look at this as a complete reversal, that actually it's an anti malevolence thing, that actually it's Bluebeard's struggle to reveal the secrets that he has, because he doesn't want to pain Judith. And how could that be? Then the entire dementia scenario formed. And we got together, we looked at the libretto, we understood that to make a chamber version would need vernacular translation. So we respected very much the original Hungarian. Of course, that would be hard in a small chamber piece in the middle of London in Hungarian. So we found English as a perfect way to do it, and really tried to respect the actual terminology, so that it would not be perceived as us trying to fit the story into our scenario. And it was amazing. The poetry blossomed, and found that the essence of all of that was incredibly powerful. And Judith suddenly gained not hysteria, but real moments of despair and realization that she was not able to remember her own memories, and that Bluebeard was somehow trying to protect her from these incidents in their married, long, lovely, cozy suburban marriage that was being torn apart by her stage 3 or 4, maybe even 5 of dementia. Mm-hmm. And we saw opportunity to collaborate with people that are supporting dementia, and it suddenly became this incredible outreach, and we really connected with so many people. And honestly, the audiences, we had small audiences. It's now developed into this, as you say, it's going around the world now in various forms, also now with full orchestra. I'm pleased to hear and to see that, in fact, we're touching communities really that are living with dementia, and representing it fairly, and giving people a chance to experience not only the pain, also the joy. There are some really amazing moments in the music of Bartók, particularly Fifth Door. Everybody will know that a big C major chord happens, and he describes his kingdom, his dominion. And this is one of the most unbelievably joyous parts of this particular interpretation. So we've had a wonderful chance to develop Bartók in a way that people are going to, have been very surprised and moved by. And as I said, that's incredible that we can do that as musicians.
You mentioned you're doing another John Adams opera this year. What is that?
That's called Antony and Cleopatra.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a premiere in San Francisco in the autumn of 2022. And in the latter part of this year, we've been able to bring it to Europe, to Barcelona, the wonderful Liceu Theatre in Barcelona.
Yeah.
And the orchestra was amazing. We had a few Catalan and Spanish singers join us from the original cast, and I had the first opportunity to play on stage with Julia Bullock.
Who
So
was pregnant in the first in San Francisco, and therefore,
absolutely,
yeah.
and was just unfortunately the timing was was a shame that she couldn't take the role for which it had been written. But we realized that in Barcelona now we feel we've got something very, very special.
When I began the show in the teeth of the pandemic in April of 2020, my first guests were people everyone knew because I frankly wanted to get an audience, and I had Thomas Hampson, Christine Goerke, and Ben Hepner, and Ferruccio Furlanetto. But then I decided, and Manfred Honeck, but then I decided I want to present an artist who people don't know yet, but may know. And I had Julia Bullock at the very beginning of this whole thing.
Wow.
And, she sort of said to me, really? After having Hampson and Goerke and Hepner and so forth. I said, yes, absolutely. I had seen her at Juilliard because I do stuff at Juilliard. And I had seen her develop, and she really was a remarkable young artist at Juilliard and has now become a major artist, blazing her own path artistically. So I had hoped to come to San Francisco, but the pandemic and other things got in the way. But was that recorded in any way, either San Francisco or Barcelona?
There was a stream of our San Francisco version with. I have to shout out to Amina Idris because
Yes.
she was an Egyptian Cleopatra.
Yeah.
She grew up in New Zealand, but uh, her portrayal of Cleopatra was special and suited the character of the production and everything. She was a real yeah, her singing and her acting and her general contribution gave a launch to the piece
Mm-hmm.
beyond comparison, really. So I'm happy to say that yeah, that was streamed, and I dare say it's in the can somehow for that. Our Barcelona production was due to um, these streaming rights and unions and people are trying to protect their livelihoods. I understand that
Yeah.
completely. So there was an unfortunate hiatus for the streaming of that particular production. But I'm hopeful that we're going to get this cast together, and it's going to come soon to somewhere hopefully near you.
I'm hopeful of that as well. So I'm going to
Yeah,
take our steering wheel and go in a very different direction
yeah.
because it relates to something that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to get to, um, about poetry and how you look to poets for knowledge. I won't say inspiration because that's an overused word, but for knowledge. And I happen to be a big admirer of Shostakovich. And out of all measure, I don't know why that is, but I am. And you have made recordings of his English poets, but especially for my interest, the Michelangelo sonnets. I need to tell you the background of this, that one of my ongoing pursuits for decades now has been walking the life of Michelangelo. A lot of people walk the walk in northern Spain. I walk his life, and I go wherever his works are or were, wherever he set foot, where he kept his cheese, uh, exploring dogs that he liked, whatever it was about him. And he was a rather remarkable poet, in addition to being a pretty good painter and sculptor. And Shostakovich took these sonnets, some of his sonnets, and translated them into Russian. And I'm just going to say that they speak about the inner life of an artist and then hand over to you.
Yeah, I must say, I've that was a project which uh, came at me a bit sideways, well, almost out of the blue, really. And it was Ondine was the wonderful Finnish recording company,
Mhm.
which we've I've enjoyed putting a number of projects together, particularly of the Finnish composers, uh, particularly. But the Finnish uh, uh, radio wanted to record this particular work in a version that had been newly discovered, or at least not recorded in the slightly reduced orchestra forces, and uh, and they wanted it to to make it, and then they came to me and said, would I do it in the original Florentine
Italian.
Italian,
Yeah.
and I kind of jumped on this because my first year at university was dealing with Dante and all this incredible, uh, well, the expressive language of that period. And I mean, I said, well, how can we, when Shostakovich obviously got one of the best translators to create, because I think he had thought about it, about doing it in that Italian, and then realized, no, it would make much more sense if they were translated, and he did, and he wrote. Now so there I was, thrust into as kind of a translator scholar. Oh my goodness, how could this work? I want to honor Michelangelo, of course, and yet Shostakovich as well. So trying to then put this together, and I must say, I had some very wonderful help from a few Italian scholars about how it could work, and they said no, when the way the expressiveness of the music is so much part of this Italian style, and so we created it, and I must say it became a real project, of a labor of love, in retranslating or fitting Shostakovich's music back into the words of Michelangelo, and we got pretty close, I think.
Mhm.
I mean, one has to sort of have the arrogance to say, well, if he had stayed with the original, then he might have extended this note a bit longer. He might have given this emphasis to this word because of the lilt of the of the of the pentameter or whatever it was, and so there we were. But we created something in incredible, actually,
Yeah.
uh, from that point of view, and it made me fall in love with Shostakovich. So
Yeah.
because I had no idea that, I mean, yes, there's a brutality. Yes, there's a I got to be careful using that word. That's not really the right word. There's a passion again of the depth of music, the real core of how aggressive sound can bring out aggression, and
Mhm.
or relay that idea of aggression, um, and the I mean, it just trying to um, inhabit that sound world again. I mean, you reminded me completely on how on tenterhooks I was the whole time, thinking, can I improve my own my own Italian language, and can I sing the right notes, and can I make them lyrical? Can I make them, live really? Because in the end, that's all I'm doing with any song or aria, is trying to make sure that the character and the emotional life of the character is being represented. The composer has given me all that tool to do that. So yeah, but this was coming kind of, weaving my way back into the essence of the poetry, and Shostakovich related to these circumstances incredibly. The challenge of oppression, of Work, I think, is one of the titles of and
Yep.
and Michelangelo is, saying, I have to, the hammer strokes against the stone. And you could feel Shostakovich, yes, I have to write these notes against the oppression of my masters. And they have to be seen, I have to be seen not to be creating anything subversive. And yet I am creating something subversive. It's glorious. And I just love that kind of play between composers' talent and the revealed music. It's gorgeous, gorgeous. No, I would
Michelangelo. Yep. Go ahead.
no, I was just thinking that in fact, in the end, it's this wonderful tug between the people who think they're asking for music from a composer and getting something which they think on the surface is what they asked for. But actually, Shostakovich
Mhm.
is a huge gift of his own personal. Uh, I mean, he was very moved. I'm trying to remember. He wasn't so well when
No,
he was
he was
writing
not.
them, and he really, really struggled with completing them. And um, I and so it's one of the last. If I'm recalling correctly, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it was one of the last things that he did in fact write.
It was. And part of the resonance for him and for me, and I'm guessing for you, is that Michelangelo, very late in his life, he lived to almost 89. His birthday was March 6th, 1475, and he died February 18th, 1564.
Wow.
And so that was a long life for then. It's a good lifespan now, but it was a very long life for then. And he was very dirty and ill-kempt and temperamental. And when he would wake up in the morning, he had to work. And he would basically sleep in not a very good bed and not wash and not change his clothing. And food would be left for him because he had to work. And he would get up and go from his bed to whatever he was working on. And he was working on a sculpture, which is now called the Rondanini Pietà.
Mm.
And it's in Milan, but only since the 1950s. And it's, one could say, unfinished. I think it's not unfinished. And it's very austere. It's very modern looking.
Mm.
And it's not the Pietà, the gorgeous Pietà of the Vatican from the 1490s. It's not the Florentine Pietas that show a lot more pain and anguish, but which he never fully completed because he wasn't happy with them. But this last one is very spare
Mm.
and is the work of an old man
Mm.
whose vision was impaired, whose energy was flagging, but who felt that he had to work. And when Sunday approached, he was religious. He would think not to work, but at a certain point late in his life, he worked on Sundays as well. And this concept of the necessity to work, the necessity to create no matter what, even though the sculpture that he was working on would not find any interest to the people of Rome and Florence at that time.
Mm.
That, as someone who likes to work, fascinated me a lot about these guys. That I feel if you wake up, you got to work, and
Yeah. Yeah.
which some people think is pathological. To me, it's nourishing.
Yeah. No, Fred, I love all the strands of your knowledge and culture. It's just incredible. I mean,
Thank you.
I so feel I so feel enriched by talking to you. I mean, you made the end of my year so happy to be
Thank you.
invited here because I knew we would talk about some great stuff.
That's why I feel how I feel about you. You and I, since we are talking about Dante, you and I'll say I had the pleasure, I'm guessing you had the pleasure too, of sharing a stage at the Casa Italiana Zedili Marimo of New York University.
Uh,
And that exists for people who want to find it. And the director of the Casa, Stefano Albertini, is a great scholar of things Italian. And they have a very strong department on Dante.
mm,
So a couple of years ago, I did an evening about Dante and opera that people can find by searching on YouTube Dante and opera Fred Plotkin. And I will send that to you. I'm building a list of things to send you.
yeah.
Um, but there's a great deal there. And I
Wonderful.
didn't know about you that you had spent your first year of university focusing on Dante. How come?
Oh, it was serendipitous, really, because when I came to England to think I was going to be a choral conductor, someone said to me, "Well, you should go to Cambridge and sing in the one of the choirs of the colleges there." And I happened upon King's College. It was something I would aspire to, of course. And I had had not a very good experience the previous week in Oxford, trying to play a string quartet at sight as a keyboard exercise. And so it was decided that my ability in the music department at such a level would probably not suit the Oxford standard. So I reconsidered the following during the following week, and someone suggested, well, why don't you do modern languages like French, which you know from Canada? And I said, that's a good idea. Can I do anything from scratch? And I said, yes, Italian. Anyway, so up I went, and there I found myself in the first year Italian, if you know, reading reading parallel translations of of L'Inferno, and it's like, so how much of this are we going to do? And they said, well, Inferno is the first term, Purgatorio is the second term, and
Mm-hmm.
Paradiso is the final term. And anyway. So that was one of my that was it. That's what introduction to the Italian language was at Cambridge when I first went. So I was lucky enough to get in the choir and be able to do that. But um, it was incredible. It was just incredible. I mean, I remember, having to fast track and read it, and then by the end of the year, we were expected to write and translate into 15th century
Mm-hmm.
uh, Florentine dialect. I'm not sure I was so good at that. However, it did give me the skills to confront Shostakovich
Yeah.
and Michelangelo, and it's kind of like, wow, that's bringing a circle. Wow,
Everything connects.
wow, 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 wow. Anyhow, that was my introduction. So it was an incredible year, incredible
So
year.
one of the most famous influences Dante had on opera is Puccini's Trittico,
Right.
which we have Il Tabato, which represents purgatory.
Yeah,
We have Suor Angelica, my favorite, which represents paradise. And
yeah,
we have the very comic Johnny Schicchi, which represents Inferno, hell, but in a very funny way. Have
yeah.
you ever done roles in either Tabato or Johnny Schicchi? I don't think there's a role for you in Suor Angelica.
Sadly not. This year, funnily enough, both of those have been, you know, tossed in my direction. Would I do Michele? Uh, would I do Skiki? Yes, is the answer to one of
You
them,
should.
certainly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Michele is okay. Something that I would, if I was a little earlier in my career, maybe. But certainly Skiki would be a lovely
You'd be
thing.
a natural.
I'd be
Um,
lovely to do.
so I'm not a singer, but I have appeared in productions, and my favorite role was playing Bozo Donati,
Oh,
the
brilliant.
corpse. Johnny Schicchi.
That would be terrific. Terrific.
um, so I'm going to go back to a couple of things.
Yeah.
One, because I really don't want to leave her out.
Okay.
You were talking about working in Finland, and we lost Kaija Saariaho this year, the wonderful Finnish composer who I knew. I know you knew her and worked on her wonderful opera L'amour de loin. And would you talk, because she died quickly and too soon and of a brain tumor, and she had not let the information out. And so when she died, the death was rather shocking for us. And I met her in Finland. I saw her in France. I knew her in New York, and was very fond of her, the woman, but fond of her, the composer, in a major way. Talk about her, if you would.
Yeah. Well, I first met Kaya when L'amour de loin had just had its premiere at the Salzburg Festival in 2000, and with the very talented Dawn Upshaw um, and Dwayne Croft, actually. Um, and I'm struggling to remember the first creator of the Pilgrim. The three characters and the chorus. It then had a further life in various co-production houses, principally the Châtelet in Paris, and of course Finnish National Opera. And I was invited to take part in the Paris version from then. Kent Nagano was conducting, and I was introduced to her music, and it was incredible. The troubadour, Geoffrey Rudel was his name. It was a sound world which felt completely natural to me. I mean, she uses electronics a little bit. She uses kind of amazing wind textures. There's a lot of sighing in her music, in a way very expressive. That kind of what I would call chromaticism, which goes up and down. And she was one of the first people who made me think of music as really an expression of the human voice, divided up between instruments. It was incredible. She also had this amazing ability to orchestrate water and air and light, really. And as if you hear her music with any of those ideas in your mind, it's kind of like, well, it's so obvious that this is a technique that, you know, should have been adopted by our many people. In any case, she seems to have been a absolute harbinger of these kind of sound worlds.
Yeah.
But she loves the human voice, and she again, we talked about the honesty of sound, and what more honest sound can you think of than Dawn Upshaw? Really just incredibly free and floating, and beautiful representation of the lithe, limpid soprano voice. And she was the celebrated lover who Geoffrey kind of imagined in his mind. And so this journey of love from afar over a tortuous journey over the Mediterranean Sea, finally, and Geoffrey dies in her arms at the end, having seen her for the first time. Anyhow, incredibly romantic. And what I found, again, it was production by Peter Sellers, so I have a lot to thank Peter for. Generally in my life, I have to say, from Magic Flute at Glyndebourne in the 90s through Kaya's music, through John's, through Nixon in China, and that's to Dr. Atomic. Peter has, been incredibly a guide for me in so many ways. But in any case, Kaya, and my introduction to Kaya was this incredible music. From then on, we did it a number of times, and rejoiced in it, recorded it for Finnish National Opera under Esa-Pekka Salonen. And my whole love affair with Finland began. I have since sung music by Eino-Juhani Rautavaara, have sung his orchestrations of Sibelius songs, have sung with the Helsinki Symphony. It's just, and it reminds me so much of Canada geologically, that I've found this amazing. And so Kaya, I have a wonderful photograph here in my little office of someone walking in the depths of winter, just along a farm track, and it's the sun is only just rising above, and it's snow everywhere. It's like this is my life. That's what I grew up with, but it's in
Mhm.
Finland. And she gave me that as a thank you for Geoffrey, for which I'm very touched. It's been tragic to lose her this year.
Yeah.
Um, her ability to ah, her incredible output over the last few years. I mean, she wrote a piece for me called True Fire, which is for
Hmm.
orchestra and baritone. Um, and she wonderfully started to include her wonderful son Alexei in putting together texts and things. And we are talking about Shostakovich and Michelangelo, the tough business of being a creative artist, and what is it? And this is Kaya's piece, True Fire, how dark and how challenging it can be, and yet how the spark sometimes can just ephemeral. Um, Again, Ondine has done me a favor and recorded that. And so my time with her really, I'm so grateful. I mean, her and her family, Jean Baptiste, and their wonderful daughter, Alisa, is a violinist and conductor now as well. And Jean Baptiste was also, he's a creative. They formed this amazing unit of music and uh, production, and her choral music infuses voices in a way which is amazing. I know there was a was it her 60th or 65th in New York? Carnegie was doing a wonderful
Yeah.
um, uh, uh, survey of her stuff, and she went too soon, really too soon. Her last opera, Innocence, my word, tackling subjects which were unbelievably painful, and yet she could somehow, through tragedy, she was still able to find the humanity in in the drama, in the always people that somehow it was just this amazingly personal stories which could then resonate with an audience. It was I don't know. We have to celebrate that she was here.
Yeah. I know
Um,
that Innocence is coming, opened in Aix-en-Provence and got spectacular notices and feedback. I know it's coming to the Met and it's going elsewhere. You and I separately will have to sit down over a big plate of herring
yeah.
and talk about our mutual love for Finland. I've worked there a lot, really a
Oh,
lot. And,
wow, that's so
it's just
inspiring.
an amazing country that I adore,
Yeah.
but not for today.
Yeah.
A couple of other things. Jerry, I know I could talk to you for hours if you would talk to
Yeah.
me for hours,
Yeah.
but we're not going to do that. Um, but there are a couple of things. You mentioned three things. I'll have them in my head.
Yeah.
First is Oxford. Um, to my great regret, I've never been to Cambridge. And I've been to a lot of places, but I've never been to Cambridge. And I really would love to go to Cambridge and visit and absorb it. And friends of mine who have been to Cambridge, studied there, just are rhapsodic about Cambridge. And I'd love to go there. I've taught at Oxford,
Mm.
and I love Oxford, not because I don't love Cambridge, I don't know Cambridge,
Oh, right.
but I'm reminded of something that happened there a few years ago. I was teaching, it was the year that Richard Strauss had a big anniversary, I guess 150
Mm.
from his birth. And I was teaching about Richard Strauss. And Jesse Norman came through and was teaching about Jesse Norman, basically about her new memoir and about her art and so forth. And I knew her. We worked together on Les Troyennes at the Met and a couple of other things. And we were at a dinner one night that was put together by the people who thought, wouldn't it be nice if Fred Plotkin could meet Jesse Norman? And Jesse and I knew each other. And there were a lot of students at this dinner, as happens a lot in British universities. And then they were sort of around us. And I turned to Jesse and I said, let's do an impromptu master class here about Richard Strauss. And I wish it had been recorded, but no one thought to do that because they didn't have the means right there. It was at a dinner at a university dining hall
Yes.
at Christchurch.
Yeah.
And it was a phenomenal evening because it was as if we had rehearsed this for months.
Wow.
And I knew enough of the Strauss repertory, of the vocal repertory, that I could just feed her a question, and she would be very interesting, not just grand in the way that she was, but really fascinating and intellectual about whatever we're talking about. And it's the last time she and I were together, and I'll send you a photo that was taken that night, that miraculously she looked short and thin and I looked tall and fat. I'm not thin, but but she even knew how to be photographed in such a
Yeah.
way.
Oh, how amazing. How
But
amazing.
I would love to come to Cambridge sometime. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and you were talking about Kaya Sariaho. It's a question that I was going to ask you an hour ago that we're going to get back to because I think it's very important. I recently was having a conversation here in New York with a woman about opera and about what speaks to me in opera, and her perception was fat people, loud, that stuff. Um, and I tried to explain that opera, among its many wonderful things, is that it gives us a window into tragedy. And when we were talking about Maria Callas before, who understood tragedy as a Greek woman, partially Greek woman, understood the roots of tragedy, knew how to convey it, knew not to overact, but the tragedy, I feel, has been sanitized in daily life in our world, unless you have a bomb drop on you, or unless you are gunned down, unless there's an earthquake, unless there's some disaster, man made or otherwise, that happens, unfortunately, way too often in our world. And I feel that taking people to opera helps them understand the emotional components of tragedy sometimes, um, in ways that other art does not. And so I'm just going to ask you the general question, opening the vein of tragedy in your perception of opera and in your performance of opera.
Well, first of all, it's a huge responsibility. Um, I think performers are in this unique position where, in the first instance, a a poet or librettist has fashioned a scenario, and they've thought deeply about it, and they've decided to choose this bit to offer to the composer. Then the composer goes through this process of understanding what scene, scenario, sentences, characters are doing within this drama, which then manifests itself in either a reflection, a response, or some interpretation of that emotion, which then allows this universal language of music to then flow out and frame the word, caress the word, envelop the word, become the word. And so as a singer, I then am guided by my own musical experience, my own reaction to the context, helpful comments from other colleagues who are equally trying to reveal the wonder of the, and then in the end we have to make it our own. And I think that's really the incredible thing about being a singer of this type of music, is that somehow we've allowed the training of our voices to reach a certain flexibility and power and intimacy. That's this kind of vast kaleidoscope of of technical, physical, and what we can demand of ourselves to reflect and share that amazing, vast range of of human physicality, vocal physicality, and so that from an emotional point of view we can respond. And then it's the incredible process that when you get on stage, you're creating it for the first time. And this is in a performance. So that the situation is not rehearsed, it's not prepared. Of course, it's both of those things. But actually, what we need to convey is that it's happening to that person in that moment. And you talked about, when we first began speaking, you talked about, do I leave the world at off the stage? And I can see no other way, really. And because, if, in fact, hopefully, and I heard you say it during the course of our conversation too, the audience is also hopefully leaving the world that they live in behind. They're opening themselves up. For goodness sake, they're giving at least an hour or more of their precious time to be with you, to open themselves up to an experience which they may not expect, which they may feel very vulnerable about. Of course, you have people that are very critical, analytical, and don't allow themselves the option because it's a self-protection thing, of course. And we as performers need to respect that. But as a performer, I am giving my instantaneous enactment of a scene which can be very painful to that character, which can be incredibly and hopefully underplayed, so that there's an idea that I'm just being as honest as I can be so that the audience can receive the truth of it. And that's a hot boy. Those are lots and lots of layers. And people wonder why opera is kind of intense. Well,
Yeah.
because you have all these contributors being funneled down to this one moment of musical experience. And, in some ways, it's like, yeah, that's why people keep coming back to the same opera, because they haven't heard it all.
Mm-hmm.
They have, of course, but no, they're getting a new experience, even with the same music, even potentially with the same performers. That somehow there is a renewing of this incredible connection between, those initial creators, and then me as a recreator trying to make it instantaneously happen. Peter Brook, was somebody who I was respected as a theater director, and he said any space is a performance space, and actually in that regard, it's my own practice room, my own piano, my own studio, my own mind. In some ways, I'm always fabricating potential scenarios, potential wangs up, and in the end I have to discard them all and just be in those moments. That vein of tragedy is so precious, and it's so brilliant, and it's so cutting that we have to be very, very careful with it. We understand in the great pieces of our literature, musical literature, we know the ones which hit us, right on, and they're often called hackneyed, but people still come, and so there must be value in that and in what we do, and striving actually for even more. I still try and do my breathing exercises and scales every day so that I have access still to those potentially most vulnerable moments. And I think if I can be a vulnerable character, then an audience is going to understand that the tragedy is real, and people feel it deeply.
When I've taught opera to younger people, which I do a lot of,
Yeah.
at a certain point with certain works, largely by Verdi, frankly, Rigoletto, Traviata, Aida, Otello, the big ones. I say to them or ask them, is that tragedy or is that life? And it opens up a whole discussion because a lot of these younger people have not explored tragedy. And, with the case of Gilda and Rigoletto, they'll say, well, she brought it upon herself. It's her own fault. In the case of Aida, well, that's the choice she made. That Radames, that's the choice he made. Otello, maybe that's a tragedy, but he was a flawed character too. They come up with all these reasons. Violetta, well, had she lived a different life, she would not have gotten sick at 23. But now I've tried this on older people when I lead classes. And it's very interesting because their view of what is tragedy and what is life is a lot more refined because they've seen more life.
Hmm.
And they see tragedy in the small things.
Yeah.
But others have a certain equanimity that comes with life experience that says, well, that's life and that's part of life. So that, for example, the Bluebeard's Castle and the Judith having dementia in that interpretation,
Yeah.
that's life. It's not, to me, it's sad, but it's not necessarily tragic.
Hmm.
And I try to tease out that word for
Yeah.
people so that we understand what tragedy is.
Yeah.
We can honor it and understand it and try to combat it whenever we can through our good works and through
Hmm.
our shared human experience.
Hmm.
But certain things are just life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's a is fascinating because in some way injustice is the
Mm-hmm.
kind of is it the linchpin of and yes, of course, our moral awareness of an injustice within our own life, I suppose, wouldn't be seen as a tragedy unless it was viewed from the other side,
Yeah.
and um, because we are just living our life as unfair as it seems, and um, yeah, no, I mean that's for me what art is able to support and reveal and it's incredible. It's incredible. What a job we have. Oh my word. It's a
So,
job.
final question, though, you and I, yes, you
Job.
you and I could go on at Wagnerian length, I think, but um, just before I sat down and zoomed into you, I decided to take out my pen and paper and write down the name of all the Canadian opera workers I can think of.
Hmm.
And very quickly, I have John Vickers, Teresa Stratas, Jerry Finley, Adrian Pachanka, Robert Carson, Ben Hepner, Maureen Forrester, Judith Forrest, my bad handwriting, John Relier, Russell Braun, the son of Victor Braun, Edward Johnson, the tenor who ran the Metropolitan Opera in the 1930s, Richard Margis and George London, Louis Quilico, his son Gino Quilico, Michael Shade-Shada, I don't know how to pronounce it, and Yannick Nazet-Sagan. That was just a very, very, very fast writing out of that. What a lot of these people have, Vickers, Stratas, Finley, London, and a number of others, is, and Adrian Pachanka, a kind of bigness of emotion, and that's not a negative judgment anyway, it's a positive assessment, um, that many people don't associate with Canadianness. We who live in the northern tier of the United States look north and see Canada as the better angels of our nature, people with equanimity and kindness and decency, except for hockey, and good health care and a certain humanitarianism, accepting refugees from elsewhere, and all of that the myth of Canada to Americans who are progressive see and admire and so on. And therefore, we wouldn't necessarily expect the fire and depth that may go with that. And I know I'm speaking in stereotypes, but but I mean, I worked with John Vickers. I worked with Teresa Stratas, two more phenomenally temperamental in the best sense and emotional and powerful people you'll never meet. Robert Carson is a genius. He's just a remarkable stage director of I'm not saying the Canadians should not be, because obviously they could and should be. But what I'm asking you as a Canadian who moved to the UK is talk about what would be in the Canadian life that would prompt this power. I think the word I'm using is power.
Cold.
Okay.
No,
Old or bold?
well, I mean, in the northern hemisphere, of course, we lose
Oh,
light.
cold.
It's cold. We lose light, by mid-October, um, and there's this kind of, hunkering down somehow, and um, yeah, well, I mean, like my Finnish photograph, really, that sun, glows a little, but there's a steeliness of understanding that nature is gonna, is only just a few degrees away from just silencing us
Mhm.
in that regard. I mean, the access to the wilderness has always been a big uh, part of my motivation, shall we say, for pining for Canada. Um, yeah, this wide open space. I mean, we feel small, humbled by nature. There's this relationship that we understand. We profit from it in the summertime, of course. Outdoor living, lakes, forests, mosquitoes. Holy moly! Um, but then there's, everything's on a grand scale. Nature's on a grand scale. No doubt America is too, and there are parts of Europe which are, I mean, Germany has every kind of geological and natural phenomenon in its within its borders. France too. I mean, this year I've been in Spain a little bit more than actually more than ever, and I was kind of thinking, wow, these great open plains and dry desert-like conditions, and someone said, well, it's the Arctic for you, isn't it? Just a little bit colder. Well, I guess. So, but literally, the idea of it's, I mean, some of our great cultural icons, uh, of modern day, Margaret Atwood, uh,
Mhm.
is one of our great beacons of what when I say determination in some ways of yeah. I mean, we have our schooling is very country centric, nationalist centric. We think we're very influential on the world stage. A huge shock for me when I left Canada at the age of 19 to realize that actually very little playing, in the workings of the world. Yes, we're seen as a buffer. I certainly grew up with the idea that any nuclear attack would fall on us rather than the states, just because we were in the middle, and and therefore, and so we were pumped up to think that yes, we are the keepers of sanity and of peacemaking and of we have this land that we can cherish and everything. Canada's gone through huge challenges in the last decade or so about its own treatment of indigenous people, and we're going to be smarting about that for a long time, uh, and hopefully find solutions, to and reconciliations and all that between our history and our activity. Um, of course, we are we are peopled by many different cultures, and passionate Ukrainians, svelte Swede. Here we're nationalistic stereotypes going on here, but we are harbinger, a harbor for refugees that have experienced terrible things in their lives. And yes, it's a big land. And there are big personalities within it, but perhaps because there's so much space, we don't quite resonate so loudly. Um, it's a conformity, passivity, the idea of going to war, I think now for any of those that did fight in the two world wars, it was such a strange element. We seemed geographically so separate, but the passion was still there. And my gosh, if you talk about hockey, of course, it's going to be passionate. If you're going to talk about, Canadian style football, that's passionate too.
Yeah.
But of course, but there is a realization. I think there's that. I would go back to the natural. This idea of survival. Uh, that everybody probably has had this idea that we're coming to a hostile land. We live in a hostile land that could, in the depths of winter, just freeze you out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that must be part of it. That there's if not this kind of acceptance of one's natural state, at least I know that I need to work very hard to keep, habit, to keep discipline, to keep surviving.
You were equating, and I agree with you, elements of Canada with elements of Finland. And the
Yeah.
Finns have a word, sisu, Sisu. Do you know that word?
Oh no, tell me.
Oh, it's a wonderful word. Um, because you can't really define it. But the way I define it is the following, because it's central to their self-awareness and perception. That sisu means a certain kind of determination against the elements.
Ah,
And that if a Finn comes up to a big wall, certain people will, excuse me, try to jump over the wall to get the other side. Certain people burrow under the wall to get to the other side. Certain people try to find the end of the wall and go around it. The Finns will bang into the wall until they knock it down to get to the other side. This kind of determination in the face of obstacles that gives them the sense of who they are.
yeah.
They are resilient, but they're they're not daunted by things that other people would find very
No, no.
daunting. When you have a massive superpower on one side, when you have awful weather, when you have everything that the Finns face, and yet, um, I think another thing about Finland that's a little different from Canada is that when you look at all the states around the Baltic, all of them except for Finland had monarchies. So
Uh,
Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Poland, Russia,
yeah,
and the others,
yeah.
they were used to a system where there was a ruler, an empire sometimes.
Mm,
But in the case of Finland, there's an equality that comes from not having had that.
mm,
So there's a basic egalitarianism in Finnish life that exists and is practically imposed as a virtue. An example I love to give is I was teaching in an elementary school once in Helsinki, wonderful music students, little kids, and they wanted me to have lunch with them in the school cafeteria. And, I'm not saying I'm special, I'm not, but in other places they would say, well, you come over here and sit down or wash your hands there. In Finland, I had to line up with the kids to wash my hands and wait my turn for the food. That was terrific. That said so much to me about who the Finns are that I loved,
yeah,
because
yeah,
no one is better than anyone else. And that's
yeah,
such a marvelous outlook,
yeah.
which I just adored.
And in fact, it's quite true when one goes to become part of their to perform a concert or be part of a presentation. It's very nice to have you with us. It's very nice to have you with us as part of our general artistic community, and 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 not that that's it, but that's it. It's so equal that they respect that you've come. They don't say, "Oh, you are a star," or "Ooh, so and so could have," wish one of our Finnish people could have done that. It's just no. It's a welcoming, leveling, and I felt like you, very embraced by
So,
that.
final question, my friend: which startled you more, being named Sir Gerald Finley in the British Empire, or having a postage stamp as a living person in Canada?
Oh well, I
Not
must
many people I know get a postage stamp when they're alive.
say, well, to be frank with you, I'm not a sir. I'm not a sir.
Oh, what are you?
No, I'm I I have a what's it called? It's called a commander of the British
Oh,
Empire.
that's good enough.
So which is still pretty nice, I have to
Yeah.
say. And the stamp, I mean the stamp made me laugh, I have to say. Because that's something that's well, again, I suppose it's the sort of thing that my mother would have just gone, oh, I didn't know that could happen to opera singers. We have great commemorative statesmen and occasionally hockey players. Who knows? Maybe even the occasional movie star. But to put an opera singer on the thing, which I shared happily with Adrian Pijonka, of course,
Yeah.
and Irving Gutman, who was a great, wonderful, and as you said, uh, Edward
Johnson.
Edward Johnson as well. So there we are, and incredible. Of course, it was hilarious to be licked.
Well, I was about to ask you, maybe it's too intimate to ask. Is it self-adhesive like American stamps, or do you have to lick
Oh, I think mine was a liquor. But I
Liquor is quicker.
Yeah. No, for me, you mentioned all those wonderful, incredible singers that have had their Canadian origins, and you know, it's. I mean, I appreciate your enthusiasm for my work, of course, but I, I am so happy to do what I do, and to do it at a level which I would, of course, have dreamt about from when it would, but I never thought it would turn into this incredible encounter with these incredible musicians, and to really sing it some of the most amazing sing the most amazing music in the most amazing places with with such appreciation, and I'm blessed, and I count my stars, and I look at the moon and think, wow, that's that's as far as we can go. We can only do what we can do, and when the journey stops, it will stop. But let's keep one foot in front of the other. Still, it's really wonderful.
Gerald Finley, my friend, thank you. I have loved this conversation. What a wonderful way to conclude one year and point to a better year for the whole world. And I thank you for everything that you bring to it.
It's been such a pleasure, Fred, to spend this time, and I echo your sentiments completely. I think as musicians, we have a huge duty of care to our audiences, and I hope we can continue, and bring joy and peace and some healing to everyone over the next year and years to come.
And to all a good night.